The Steel Sentinel, a personal history of the M4 Sherman. If you were to stand in a field in Normandy in the summer of 1944, the sound of the war wouldn't just be the whistle of artillery or the crack of rifles. It would be the rhythmic, metallic clack-clack-clack of rubber-blocked tracks and the low, radial hum of a Continental engine. That was the sound of the M4 Sherman. To history books, the Sherman is often reduced to a set of production numbers and armor thickness charts. But to the 5 men cramped inside its belly, it wasn't a weapons system. It was their home, their shield, and too often, their furnace. To understand the Sherman, you have to look past the cold steel and see the human hands that built, drove, and bled in it. Born of necessity, built by industry. In 1941, the U.S. Army was frankly behind the curve. While the Panzers were tearing through Europe, America was still tinkering with the M3 Lee, a stopgap tank with a bizarre high profile and a gun mounted in the side of the hull. The Sherman was the great correction. It wasn't designed to be the best tank in a one-on-one duel. It was designed to be mass-produced. American car factories, Ford, Chrysler, General Motors, stopped making sedans and started churning out Shermans. By the time the war ended, nearly 50,000 Shermans had rolled off the lines. This was the arsenal of democracy in physical form. While a German Tiger tank was a handcrafted masterpiece that took months to build and required a PhD to repair, the Sherman was the everyman's tank. If a part broke, you could likely find a replacement in the next supply depot. The 5-man universe. Inside the Sherman, space was the ultimate luxury. It was a world of cold grease, spent shell casings, and the smell of sweat and gasoline. Each tank was a micro-society of 5. The commander, perched in the turret, he was the eyes of the tank. He spent most of his time with his head out of the hatch, exposed to snipers, because looking through a periscope was like trying to navigate a room through a straw. The gunner, he sat in the dark, his eye pressed to the sight, waiting for the commander to yell, "Target!" The loader, perhaps the most exhausted man in the crew, his job was to heave 75mm shells into the breach while the tank bounced over craters. The driver and assistant driver, tucked away in the front of the hull, they saw the war through narrow slits, feeling every jolt of the terrain in their spines. These men didn't just work together, they became an extension of the machine. They named their tanks Fury, Lucky Legs, Blockbuster. They welded extra tracks, sandbags, and even logs to the outside, hoping for just one more inch of protection against the dreaded German 88mm.
The myth of the Ronson. You've likely heard the nickname, the Ronson. As the story goes, the Sherman was named after the lighter because it lit up the first time, every time. There is a kernel of truth there, but it's often misunderstood. Early Shermans had a tendency to catch fire because their ammunition was stored in dry racks along the sponsons. When a shell pierced the thin side armor, the propellant ignited. However, the Americans didn't just let their boys burn. They listened. They developed wet stowage, storing ammunition in racks surrounded by a mixture of water and glycerin. If the rack was hit, the liquid doused the fire. By 1944, a Sherman was actually one of the safest tanks to be in if hit, thanks to its large hatches that allowed for a quick escape. As the war progressed, the Sherman had to evolve. In the hedgerows of France, the standard 75mm gun was like throwing pebbles at the thick hides of the German Panthers and Tigers. The British took a Sherman and shoved a massive 17-pounder anti-tank gun into it, creating the Sherman Firefly. It was the only Allied tank the Germans truly feared in 1944. Meanwhile, the Americans introduced the M4A3E8, known as the Easy 8. With wider tracks and a powerful 76mm gun, it finally gave the crews a fighting chance in a head-on engagement. Not just a tank, but a tool. The Sherman was the Swiss Army knife of the battlefield. It wasn't just for shooting other tanks. There were duplex drive tanks, swimming tanks equipped with canvas screens used on D-Day. The Crab, a Sherman with spinning chains in front to explode landmines. The Crocodile, a terrifying flamethrower variant used to clear bunkers. This versatility is what won the war. A Tiger tank might win a duel, but a Sherman could cross a bridge that wouldn't hold a Tiger. It could be repaired by a farm boy with a wrench, and most importantly, when one Sherman was knocked out, 3 more were coming over the hill to take its place.
The human cost. We often talk about the glory of armored warfare, but the reality for the crews was harrowing. When a Sherman was hit, the sound inside was like being inside a giant bell hit by a sledgehammer. The crews lived in constant anxiety. They knew their armor was thin. They knew the German Panzerfaust rockets could hide in any doorway or behind any bush. Yet they kept moving forward. They fought from the deserts of North Africa to the snowy forests of the Ardennes, and finally into the heart of Berlin. The Sherman wasn't a tiger killer by design, but it was a war winner. It provided the mobile firepower that the infantry desperately needed. It was the reliable workhorse that kept the supply lines moving and the enemy on the retreat.
Today, you can find Shermans sitting silently in town squares across France and Belgium, or in museums where their green paint is kept polished. They look small compared to a modern M1 Abrams, almost toy-like. But if you look closely at the steel, you might see the marks of a welder's bead from a factory in Detroit, or a dent from a shell fragment in the Netherlands. Each Sherman tells a story of an industrial titan that woke up, and a generation of young men who climbed into a steel box to liberate a continent. The Sherman wasn't the best tank because it was invincible. It was the best tank because it was there, it was reliable, and it was enough. It was the mechanical embodiment of the American spirit in the 1940s, practical, hardworking, and ultimately unstoppable.